Hi, I'm Bridget.
And I'm Wayne.
And we're from Sydney Fish Market, and we're going to talk all about
How to buy fresh fish.
How to buy fresh fish.
That's
and
right.
What do you look for? So let's start with what would we do if we're going to the shop? How can you tell? You're on the other side of the counter, you can't touch the fish, but there are a couple of things that you can tell even without touching
Just from
it.
the sight, Bridget, that's right. Look, I'll just pick this little guy up so we can better illustrate. But you want to look for really nice bright eyes. You want to see that really nice shiny eye. Make sure that you can see it's protruding and it's sitting just like it would in its natural environment. You want to look for a really nice smooth skin, not too many dents on there. Want to make sure that the colour's really bright. You can kind of tell just looking at it, it's not dried out, the colour's nice and bright. If you can pick up the fish, have a look inside the gill rakers there and just make sure that the gills are nice and red. That's one of the first places that oxidisation occurs.
But one of the problems is some of the shops will actually cut the gills out, so you can't always
Sure.
tell. But the other thing is,
The
if you
eyes.
can't touch the fish, what you can do is watch and see the person serving you. When they pick up the fish and they move their finger or their thumb away, you want to see the flesh look nice and resilient and bounce back again. So even if you can't touch the fish, you can watch and see what the texture is like.
Sure.
And if you ask to see the gills and there's no gills there, they'll tell you. But it also puts them on their guard that you know what you're talking about because you're asking to see something.
That's right.
So
that's
they
right.
won't be selling you anything that's dud because you obviously know what you're looking for.
It's fairly foolproof. If the eyes are nice and bright, then your fish is going to be in good condition. Now, one thing quite often that you might see is the eyes may look a little bit ghosty, but still very full. Don't be put off by that. Often the ice, when the fish is sitting in packed ice, that ice will freeze the eyeball. And the eyeball having a fair amount of water content, it can freeze up just like an ice cube does in the freezer.
But it puts people off because often people say, oh, cloudy eye, that's a
Yeah.
sign the fish is not
That's
fresh.
right.
It could just mean ice has been put over the eye and it's just made it go cloudy.
That's
so don't take that on its own.
No, sunken eyes, that's a different story.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other really good thing is about all your seafood, it should have a really good fresh sea smell. If it smells fishy, it probably is. So go to the good fish
It's funny
shops.
that, isn't it?
It is. But a nice, should smell of the ocean.
Good should smell of the ocean. Nice,
Yeah.
salty, fresh.
Now this is a little plate-sized snapper.
That's a pretty common little fish. You're going
It
to see a lot of
is.
these down here.
Yeah, and very versatile to use for lots of different things. So let's start with, when you buy it, usually the shop will ask you whether you wanted to have it gutted
I always say yes.
and scaled. The reason they leave the scales on is because it keeps the fish from drying out in the shop, so that's why the scales are left on, and then you only have the scales taken off when you're about to buy it. If you don't want them to do it, you can do it yourself. This is a scaler, but you can easily use a spoon, the back of the knife, and you always scale from the tail end towards the head.
That's right.
And a little tip if you're doing it at home, put your fish into a plastic bag, because if you miss those scales and they get onto the wall,
Oh, that's a good idea.
they are going to stay stuck to the wall, and it's also a good place to put your rubbish if you're not composting it.
Okay,
so we
so
can scale if we wanted to.
start from the tail. Just be aware if you're holding the fish, supporting it here with your left hand, just be aware that this scaler, you don't want to run that up and over the top of your finger because it can hurt if you're in a real hurry. So you just want to, don't put too much pressure on the fish.
See where it all goes.
Yeah, it flies all over the place.
It does.
We won't go too crazy. You just want to very slightly just remove those scales. You'll see them flicking off. You can see that area there is nice and smooth, whereas the area with the scales are still there. So you just want to get them nice and clean, get up nice and close to that fin line there, and get all of those scales off.
Miss too. And
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than eating scales.
Another area people miss is just down here. Just get those pieces out of in there. Just when you're cooking a whole fish and you're serving it on the plate, you really don't want that taste of the scales just sitting there. It's not very pleasant. So just get all the way through the fish. Get right up to the top of the head when you're scaling. But I think that bag's a great idea because I'm just going to cause an
That's
almighty
right,
mess
scales
here.
everywhere. Okay, so that would be the scaling, but most of the shops will do that for you.
That's right. If you're filleting your fish and you plan on taking the skin off, leave the scales on because it can facilitate the removal of the skin if the scales are still there, Bridget.
And it gives you a little bit of protection, leaving your skin on and even the scales on between the heat source and the flesh. So it just gives it that little bit of extra protection in case you're not such a perfect cook.
Look, a lot of people cook their fish whole with the scales on. They love it.
Exactly. Some of the scales will actually soften, won't they?
Mm.
Okay, do you want to do the messy bit?
Sure. What's the messy bit? The scaling
doing
or
the
we're gutting?
gutting. Yes,
Okay.
we do the
How
gutting.
do we gut a fish? Well, you don't want to use a really long and flexible knife for gutting. You just want to use a fairly stub knife. First thing you can do, just lift the head up there, and you want to cut between the two sides. So just run your knife down there. You can see I've made an incision there. Now the next thing we do is put your knife inside and just
Turn that around.
I'm going to turn that around. I'm just bringing the knife and I'm heading down towards the rear of the fish here. So I'm just going to put it into the gut cavity there. That protects you from getting hurt by the knife. and just draw your knife through all the
It's
way.
not too hard on a small fish. It can be a bit tricky when they get a bit bigger.
Sure.
It's sometimes
Well,
better to leave it to the shop.
That's right. Now you can see what I've done is I've separated the two sides of the fish. That's the gut cavity inside there, and you've still got the gills here. Now often people, and I've seen a lot of fishers do this, they just reach into that gill cavity and they rip it straight out. Over the course of its life, that fish may have actually ingested a hook and have a hook caught in there, and that can go right into your fingers and do you some damage. So always use the flat part of a knife to remove that. So you just put your knife in there and just run it along, and that whole area there will come straight out. Now the gills are connected to the gut, and that will all come out in one foul swoop. Bang.
Nice and neat and tidy.
Nice and neat and tidy.
Clean that up.
Yep. Now you can rinse this under cold water. It's not really that necessary. I think if you just want to use a paper towel and wipe the insides out, it keeps the natural oils in the fish. Often when you rinse it under the tap, you can strip a lot of that natural oil out.
Well, sometimes when people rinse it, they just leave it under the tap too long. So it really just needs to be a quick rinse and then wipe it dry with a paper towel.
Sure,
and
quick
get rid of
rinse.
all the mess.
It's quite messy, but it is wild fish after all. What are we doing, Bridget? Are we going to fillet this little fella?
This one.
Okay.
Now fillet, just to explain what a fillet means, is we're just going to cut the flesh away from the bones on either side. So there are a couple of different ways you can do the filleting. So the easiest way probably for...
Yeah, look, I might explain I'm not a gun filleter, I'll tell you that now. One of the things that I find, if I'm going to fillet a fish and I'm leaving the scales on, I'll just remove the scales around the top area of the fish. I always use this whenever I'm teaching people that have never scaled a fish, never filleted a fish before. Best to just take it very slow and work your knife around the fish first, just separating it. So the first thing you want to do is lift up the fin there, put your knife up to around where the soft tissue starts to meet the hard part of the head.
And it's quite obvious, isn't it? Because that's quite hard.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, you can feel there it's quite soft here and then it gets hard right there. So you just want to run your knife down there and just bring that right down to the base of that fillet. So you're separating it here. So you've just cleared that area. I'm down now on the spine of the fish. I can feel the spine just in there. Then the next thing I'm going to do is work my knife along this area here, along the ridge of the fish. So just going to cut through that skin, bring my knife down. What I'm doing is I'm just making it easier to remove the fillet. So you just release the skin.
And it's important to do that along this top line because that's where a lot of the flesh is, and if you don't do
That's
that,
right.
you can easily...
Look, you can go in like the hero and chop it and push through, and you'll wind up with the knife flicking out. That's how I learnt, and you lose so much fish.
You do.
So you just want to work that knife in towards the rib cage. So you just
And you can feel
very
that
slowly.
the knife's running along the rib cage, so it's
That's
not
right.
going too low.
Always with a sort of a downward pressure on the knife. Just push that through, and I can feel those ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, just in there. Okay, so we've come through. Now, the next thing you want to do is when you get to about here, you can just push your knife right the way through to the other side, and you'll see it just popping out there. So that's the quickest way to get to the bottom of that fillet. Just run your knife through, you can see that's just come right down to the tail. So what we've done, we've released the top half of the fillet, we've released the bottom half of the fillet. All we need to do now is remove the fillet from the rib bones. Now, I always like to just lift up that fillet from the tail, get my knife into position, and just grab the tail, use the tail, pull the tail towards yourself, and just run the knife through those bones. Just a little, quite...
And if you don't want to go through the bones, you can actually go a little bit up and over, can't you?
Well, you can. You can be really finicky and actually lift that fillet and draw the knife across the rib bones. But, you know, you can just as easily just chop through. There's only about 5 there. On a little plate-sized snapper, it's not all that difficult to remove those bones. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just chop right through. Now, not a bad job.
No, nothing left. That's great.
That's what I was after. I've just got those bones there showing through, so the knife's run right along the bones to the centre spine, and we've got a really nice fillet there. Not much waste at all.
That's great.